On 5.
The following program was produced by an independent
I
community
hope you keep
producer.
your face.
The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the QATV staff or board of directors. QATV, in compliance with FCC regulations, is prohibited from exercising control over the content of independent, member-produced public access programming.
Turn out the light. Believe. This is Greater Boston Paranormal.
Do you feel it? It went through like a path, like a wave.
Are you still here with us? What are your intentions?
I'm Don DeCristofaro from the Greater Boston Paranormal Associates, and with me this evening are two new members of the gang who you haven't met yet. So we're going to introduce you before we get going. On my left, your right, is the lovely and talented Amanda Cook.
Hello.
Amanda, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got interested in the paranormal, and then what fabulous circumstance it was that brought you to our midst.
So yeah, I found you guys in the depths of my mind. No, I'm just kidding. I started off looking for something fun to do for Halloween, and basically I applied to do the Ghost Ship Harbor in Quincy. I'm sure people are familiar with that. And while I was interviewing, I saw Dawn in the background, and I said, "Who is that guy? and what are they doing?" And they said, "Oh, that's the paranormal team." And I said, "That's what I want to be doing." So then I told them that's what I wanted to do, and Dawn actually called me to interview me to ask if I had a good personality before I could be a part of the team. So nonetheless, it turns out I have a decent personality.
Took you on anyway.
And here I am, and I've been a part of the GBPA now for probably 3 years, right? Almost.
Yeah, just about 3 years.
It's been a while.
Just
So
about 3 years.
that's me.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. And to my right, your left, is the lovely and talented Eva Nagy. Eva, you're going to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes.
You're going to tell us how you got into the paranormal, which is a crazy story, and how you came to join the GBPA, right?
Yes. So my name is Eva Nagy, and I've grown up with the paranormal all of my life. As far as I can remember, 4 years old is when my memories started to kick in. And everywhere I've lived, I've always had experiences. And it wasn't until about 5 or 6 years ago that I met the lovely Sandra Perez through meetup.com. She's a member of the GPA crew. And we met through Meetup, and we had gone to different events together. She, as well, had found Don DeCristofaro from the Ghost Ship Harbor. And once she joined the team, she decided to recruit me. And from there, we decided to do an investigation together as a team. And I haven't looked back since.
Great. Okay, so as you can see, Ghost Ship Harbor, while a disaster in many, many, many ways, was not a disaster in terms of membership to the GBPA. It did some great things for us. And it also brought us Eva and Amanda. So we have some things to talk about before we get going. We're going to get into this episode in a minute, but beforehand, I want to talk a little bit about the Para Expo that just finished this past weekend on the USS Salem. I want to thank everyone that participated in that. Willie Hassel from Spirit Chasers of New Hampshire, the Connecticut Paranormal Research Team, Dan and Christine Peer. Those folks just did a fabulous job putting the whole thing together. And Margaret LaForest, from the United States Naval Shipbuilding Museum. As always, there's no way we could have done anything without her tremendous support. So thank you very much. I'm not entirely sure what the final numbers are, but I'm sure we raised somewhere in the neighborhood of $5,000 for the ship and the museum, and that's a wonderful thing, and it was a great time. So this is going to be our last internal team kind of episode for a little bit. We'll talk before we sign off about the next episode, but as I think some of you know by now, the next few weeks we're going to be heading west, and we're going to film a couple of episodes while we're out there, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But this episode, we're going to talk about something that we don't use a whole lot on the ship and on investigations. We certainly never use unless Eva's with us, because she's kind of the queen of the Ouija board. And we're going to talk about that tonight, because I think it's something that everybody's familiar with, but at the same time, nobody's really familiar with. So before we get going, we're going to talk about things that have happened to us. We're going to talk about scientific rebuttals, how people kind of shoot down how the Ouija board works. But before we do that, Amanda is going to tell us a little bit about where the board came from and how that was developed. So you want to do that for us?
Yes, of course. So if for those of you that don't know, this is a Ouija board. It is typically exactly like this. Usually it has the full alphabet on it. It has numbers 0 through 9. It has typically the words yes, no, hello, and goodbye, as well as other graphics and designs included on the board. But it's typically a flat board like this, and then it is used with a planchet, which is heart-shaped, and this is typically what's used. It's usually plastic or wood on the board to spell out words and letters. And numbers, of course. So that's what the board looks like in general. But the Ouija board started in a strange way, actually, fitting enough. In 1847, the Ouija board, in 1847, the board wasn't created, but the idea of communicating with spirits through a person started really becoming a thing when 14-year-old Maggie Fox and her little sister Katie decided one day to scare their mother, and basically they created the idea that their house was haunted. So what they did was they would string apples to strings and knock them on the stairs, and they even went as far as to crack like certain parts of their body to make it seem like there was a spirit among them, or there were sounds in the house that were making it haunted. And their mother believed it to the point where she asked if they could go to the neighbors and tell them, like about the spirit, and they had control over this spirit and were able to get it to communicate on point. So that's where the idea came from, where the spirits were, able to communicate on need. So basically, after that, the neighbors started spreading the word, and their older sister Leah started getting a part of the fun, and she basically started creating public seances for money with the two girls. So they started running seances to communicate with people's loved ones, and they were doing much of the same thing, where they were making it up, unfortunately, and pretending that they were communicating with people's loved ones. So that's where a lot of the idea of seances and communicating with spirits came from. And then in 1854, spiritualism started becoming very popular in America. People were very, in tune to the spirit realm and wanted to communicate with their loved ones. There were mediums popping up all over the world, and were coming to speak to people's loved ones for money. So that really became very prominent. It actually started as a British patent by Adolphus Theodore Wagner. He started the patent for a psychograph, which is the original idea for a Ouija board. The polygraph is basically it was a word for an apparatus that, and I'm reading this part, an apparatus for indicating persons thought by the agent of nervous electricity. that's a mouthful, but basically what they're saying there is that, the idea that somebody could touch the planchette and by their subconscious they could, start creating words on the board using their subconscious. So that was the idea of the psychograph in its true form. And then in 1891, the Ouija was officially named. The creators said that the name was actually given to them by the board itself, which us as individuals and intelligent human beings know that probably wasn't the case. So the word is really split into two terms. So it's the French word oui, and like O-U-I, and then J-A is the German word ja, and it's pronounced Ouija. So that is where the name came from, and it was more of a capitalistic gain as opposed to the board telling them what the name of it was or something like that. So that's how that started. In the early 1900s is when the tool really started getting used in seances. The board became so popular that people started using it for sport and for fun, which is obviously an issue because the board, as we get into it, we'll learn it's obviously not a toy. Then in 1920, they were sick of the mediumship stuff, so they banned mediumship, which is when like a medium would ask people for money to communicate with their loved ones. So that all started going underground and people started doing it secretly, and that's when the lore started where kids were getting into using the board because it was some sort of forbidden item that they were able to play with. So that's where a lot of the underground and kids playing it at sleepovers started. And in 1966, the Parker brothers actually bought the rights to the Ouija board, which started a lot of the mainstream playing with the Ouija board and it being a thing in the public that people were okay with. Then in the 70s and 80s, Satanic Panic started, The Exorcist was made, and people really started becoming afraid of the idea of a Ouija board because after the Satanic Panic, the board became associated with cults and evil as opposed to just a toy that people were playing with for fun. So it became a really bad, dark thing for people to use, and people started getting really afraid by things like the Ouija board. In the 1990s, Hasbro finally bought Parker Brothers, and so they got the rights to the Ouija board. And so all of the boards that you see in the store now are Hasbro, which is obviously a children's brand, which isn't great, but it's fine. We'll accept that. But on the box now for the Ouija boards that you can buy at Walmart, it says, "Handle the Ouija with respect, and it won't disappoint you." So very alluring, especially to young children. And then finally, the last kind of development we had with the Ouija board that we know today is in 2013 when they created the glow-in-the-dark board, which is a backlit board. You can play it in the dark, and it is now discontinued. So if you have one like I do, you could probably sell it on eBay for a lot of money. But that's a little bit about the rundown of the history of the actual board that you can buy. Obviously, people use boards, makeshift boards, and things like that as well. But that's how the rundown of the history of the Ouija board goes.
Great.
Wow.
Thank you.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
No, that was good. Thank you very much.
Of course.
I gotta tell you, we're in the process. It was just finalized today, actually. The design for our custom USS Salem Ouija board, which is being made by a very talented guy by the name of Danny Perez, who makes Ouija boards and spirit boards and things of that nature. And we've known Danny for quite a while, and he offered to do a design, and it is spectacular. We're looking forward to getting it. Eve and I just finished out the design today, and we hope to be getting it in the next couple of weeks. So we're really looking forward to it. So, as I said before, we use the Ouija board on the ship. We've used it at a couple of other locations. We don't use it unless Eve is here because she's the one really that knows how to do it and knows how to use it. So we're going to talk about a couple of experiences we've had. Eva's going to talk about some experiences she had personally, but we're going to start out with something that happened on the ship, and we're going to go from there. Okay, so take it away, Ms. Eva.
Thank you very much, Don. Very excited to be here. So recently, in the past few months, we had a private investigation aboard the USS Salem. And there was a young lady on the board. She was fairly new to the team, and she seemed to have some kind of attachment. So shortly being on the ship in one of the rooms, she had come out and showed me some scratches on her shoulders. So I imagine she had somebody come with her onto the ship. And the team and I were discussing privately of like, okay, let's see how much of a reaction the ship is going to have with her. Whoever's scratching her, will it be coming out? So we decided to go to the CPO mess room, which is my favorite room. To me, it's like the Bermuda Triangle of the ship. I've had the most experiences there. And we had used the Ouija board there. And so we set it up on the table, and it was just me and this other girl, our fingers on the planchette. We had been asking it questions. Very quickly after, the board itself started spinning. And it started turning and spinning, and it just turned directly towards her. It just wanted to communicate just to her. And it gave us such a creepy vibe. And it jaw-dropped everybody's reactions when they saw it. And we have a clip to that. So please show us the clip.
Yeah, let's see the clip from the CPO mess.
To me, it was in the Freetown Forest on the tree stump. Holy are you guys filming this?
Yeah, I'm filming.
What the fuck are you?
And the K2s are going. Well,
Oh, you know what? This does excite me, but actually, this is the first time.
so trying to face it towards Faye.
Are you trying to face it towards me so I can see?
I felt a breeze on my hand. Ooh.
You guys are not moving that.
No,
There's
I've
no way.
never
Sure
had
doesn't
this
look
happen.
it. Sure doesn't look like it.
It
Right?
is knocking, guys.
I heard
Heard
that.
that.
All right.
So that's pretty good stuff, and that was a pretty crazy night.
Yes.
All in all, that young woman got scratched pretty good on her shoulder, which I want to stress to potential visitors is not really something that happens very often on the ship. But it happened that night, and as Eva said, we kind of thought maybe she brought something with her when she came aboard. And I do want to say there's something funny that happened that same night, and I just checked with Eva to make sure. But you know, when Eva does the Ouija board, she can't sit, and I think most people are probably too short to sit in a chair and look over the table and actually see where the planchette is. And I don't know how many times, 4 or 5 times, the Ouija board spelled out Eva sit.
Yes.
Eva sit. Eva sit. That was pretty good. That was a pretty good night. So that happened on the ship, and I think, as you could tell from the way we responded.
But you're forgetting something. Something major happened at the same time with the Ouija board when it had been spinning. We had heard the audible growl in the corridor that we could all hear with our own ears.
That was the same. That's right. That was the same night, and it was kind of funny because that guy had recorded a really bizarre growling noise, and we had heard it, and we were all kind of taken aback by it. But he was right. As we were in the CPO mess, 3 or 4 of us, maybe 5 of us, audibly heard that same growl out in the passageway. I'm telling you, if you haven't visited the ship, this is the kind of place it is, where we're talking about it and things like that happen on such a regular basis that we have a tendency to forget about them because they kind of run together. So you know, that was a ship thing, and that was a pretty crazy night. But I asked Eva to talk a little bit about things that happened to her before that, because obviously, you know, the reason we kind of turned to her as our Ouija board expert is because she had experience with it prior to joining our gang, and I asked her if she wouldn't mind to talk a little bit about some of those experiences.
Yes. So I've had a lot of experiences personally before joining the team, and a lot of them happen to be centered around college. One of the more prominent experiences is I had a friend, and we had mutual friends in college. And while they were off in classes, we happened to have some free time before regrouping. And so we'd either watch TV, hang out, whatever it might be, before getting together with everybody. One of the days I just said, how do you feel about using the Ouija board? We had nothing else to do, so he said, sure. So we went back to my dorm room. We set up the Ouija board on the floor. We were sitting on opposite sides of each other. And right off the bat, it was describing what he was wearing, the color, but what was more prominent about it was the fact that it would keep repeating the word molest back and forth over and over. And no matter how many questions I had asked to kind of divert from that, it always gravitated back to that. And I was embarrassed because I was like, all right, now it's having a weird session, it's having an off day, and it was with somebody I trusted. So I pretty much just closed the Ouija board session and apologized to him because I was embarrassed. And then we just went off and did our own thing until we regrouped with everybody else. And then shortly after, we had a night of drinking, what we always do on a Thirsty Thursday in college. And he had followed me to the room that I was sleeping, and he had thought I had slept before he made a move and started to molest me. And that ended our friendship right then and there, and he still doesn't own up to it. He still claims to have blacked out of the situation. But like, the Ouija board was telling me and warning me about this guy, and I had no idea because I had known him for a while and I had been alone with him before and never had a situation like that ever happen until after we had that session. I had another one where I had a college friend, and she was married. She was a bisexual, and we played the Ouija board regularly with each other. Just whenever we had the time, we would just play. And it was fun. And then one of the days, it was super vulgar. And I was like, all right, it's just one of those sessions, you know, that's this. And
It was
this,
super
this.
vulgar, and Amanda wasn't there.
I know.
Which is mind-boggling to
And
me,
I was
but
figuring it was just having a bad day, like one of those off sessions where it just was describing all kinds of things. And I was like, all right, this is getting strange. But before I could even think about closing, she had taken her hands off the planchette so fast and started scurrying against her bed, and she started shaking. And then she started getting emotional, and I couldn't understand why. And she looked at me, and it took a long time to get the words out from her before she confessed that everything that the Ouija board was saying was exactly what she was thinking and feeling for me. And she ended our friendship right then and there. And to this day, several years later, our friendship has never been the same because of that night.
Wow. So the Ouija board tells all.
yeah, clearly.
And I lose roommates over it, friendships over it. Yeah, it's been a wild ride, I could say. And I feel like with the Ouija board, the reason why you guys gravitate towards me with the Ouija board is I find over the years that when my hands are on the planchette, it does tend to move. And of course, I've had one-off nights where, you know, it's quiet or it doesn't shift that much.
Sure.
But most of the times, it's moving and it's pretty fluid. And that's what I bring.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, and I've said it a couple times now. We don't do it unless Eva's there, and you know, it's one of those things where you kind of look at the Ouija board as it's a tool. It's like a K2 meter or a REM pod or any of the other things we use. Maybe a better analogy is the dowsing rods or a pendulum. It's a tool. But personally, I see it as being a little bit more dangerous than those things. Certainly, there are more rules involved in using a Ouija board than there are with using a pendulum or dowsing rods. There's no question about that. And that kind of brings us to the third experience-based thing I wanted to talk about. We've spent a couple of evenings at a place in Pawtucket, Rhode Island called Slater Mill. And it's a beautiful, old, historic location, much like the ship, but obviously older. And it's a great location to go to do paranormal investigations. Actually, I don't think they do paranormal stuff down there anymore. Mm-hmm. But they did for years, and we spent a couple of nice evenings down there. We got some pretty good audio and things of that nature. But one night we did a very long dowsing rod session and a very long Ouija board session. And what the Ouija board session kind of highlights is the importance of closing out the board properly. And I think, when Amanda talks about kids using the thing and stuff like that, this is the kind of thing people forget about or don't know about or don't bother to learn before they try to use something like this, And it's kind of funny, the ship has been a lot more active since a certain ghost hunting show came and visited. And a lot of people have said that, I know a woman who said that she made a very, very good living following that particular team around and closing the doors that they open and walk away from. And that's one possibility of what started things rolling on the ship, is that these people came and did an investigation and did some things and opened some doors that they didn't close. Thank you very much. But this night at Slater Mill, we had a pretty crazy dowsing rod session, and then we broke out the board. And I don't know, I want to say it was Eva and Sandra Perez on the board this particular night. So we're going to talk about it a little more afterwards, but why don't we show the edited version, the edited for length version of the Slater Mill session. Can we do that, please?
Yeah.
So we
Close
are
the
not
session.
entertaining a demon with us. No one's here. No one is allowing this demon to attach to us.
You're not welcome.
You cannot follow us. You cannot come home with us. You need to be dismissed. Goodbye.
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 Oh,
What?
No.
All right, it needs to say goodbye.
Doesn't want to. Okay, this has to close now. You cannot penetrate here. You cannot have any rest or hold here. This is not a comfortable place for you. So we are closing this, and you may not come through the board again.
This is not your home. We are not your home. Goodbye.
Bye.
Resisting.
It needs to say goodbye in order for it to
Dump the whole
close.
thing.
We could make it uncomfortable for you.
K2 just hit too.
It did?
Yeah.
To what length?
Final, just a little bit.
So you must depart now. We would like you to say goodbye as an indication that you are departing us. Leave this place now. You have no hold.
This is where we have holy water sprinkled on us.
Now we've treaded on unfamiliar territory here and for perhaps forbidden grounds. But you must leave us now. Getting cold in here.
Mm-hmm.
Notice that?
And my fingers are freezing.
Okay.
Yours?
Mm-hmm.
Depart from this place now. We would like you to say goodbye. Resting on no. This is blessed water. In nomine Patri, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
Pull the front of your shirt down a little bit.
I can feel it hesitating.
Mm-hmm. Getting weaker. This hold is, it's being stretched, pulled away.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Give us a sign of your departure. As you leave, indicate that you are gone.
Goodbye.
And even if you don't consent, we'll close you off. Notice the change. Slower. Goodbye.
Not as cold either.
But he's going.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. All right.
Okay, so that's a pretty good video, and that was another pretty crazy night, really. And I know, I keep saying that, and some people are watching going, yeah, what the hell was so crazy about that? But believe me when I tell you that, the voice you heard off camera was a guy who I'm not going to tell you his name, but he is a self-proclaimed demonologist. And I'm talking about somebody who lectures all over the Northeast in the field of demonology. And I'm also going to tell you that he was scared to death. What you couldn't see really in that video is that he was sprinkling the board with holy water, sprinkling us with holy water. He was very, very perturbed by the fact that board wouldn't close out.
Right.
Am I right?
Yes.
And it was important that we did that, correct?
Yes, absolutely. And the reason why it's so important, it's actually prudent to close out a session, is because, as an example, one of my experiences in college, which led me to be on a hiatus on the Ouija boards for about 10 years before I came back to it, was the fact that I had played on my own without closing at the time. And the reason why that's so dangerous is because there was an attachment to me. And for about a month, I had what was called kind of like a semi-possession, where something would just take over me and I had no control over myself, until it got to the point that it was leading me into oncoming traffic. I had even gone to the hospital for CAT scans, MRIs, brain scans, neurologists, you name it, just to make sure I wasn't having cancer or tumor. And then shortly after, it just stopped and it just passed, and that was it. And so I rid my hands of the Ouija board for about 10 years. And of course, I did have kind of a calling to bring me back to it. But that it's very important to prevent those attachments too.
It is, and we're very, very careful about it. We're very, very careful about protection in general, but certainly with the board we are, because I've had situations where I've lost complete control of myself. Generally speaking, that was grain alcohol. Rather than the Ouija board, yeah. But it can happen to any of us at any time.
It can.
So, I think. Thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you.
I don't think we can go a whole lot further without talking at least a little bit, or at least touching on the detractors, okay, the debunkers, if you will, and that all started back, when spiritualism really started to pick up speed in the United States. It had been big in the United Kingdom for many, many years. But it was really before the Civil War, maybe the 1840s, when it really started to gain speed in the United States. And you got to remember, it wasn't just a commodity that was being tapped for the first time. It was a whole new ball game. All of a sudden, people were being told that they could speak to relatives that had been gone for years. It was a brand new thing, and it was massive. And it didn't take very long, needless to say, for that field to be just chock full of people who would tell you anything you wanted to hear for the right amount of money. Yep. And fortunately, the debunkers came along. And I'm going to tell you that as modern day paranormal investigators, I think we all agree that that's a good thing. When we get evidence, or what we hope is evidence, we work very, very hard to try to dispel or try to debunk that stuff before we proclaim it to be evidence. We get a video or a photograph, we work very hard to try to recreate it, to try to duplicate it and see if somehow we can do something to create the same circumstance. When we hear an audio, we listen to it countless times to make sure that it's not one of our own voices that we just missed early on. So, are we always right? Of course we're not. But we really work very, very diligently at doing that. And if you're a paranormal investigator and don't, then you're doing it wrong. So anyway, the first guys that came along were what I like to call the physical debunkers. And these were the people that went to these spiritualism sessions or seances, and they found the buttons under the table, or the mirror, or the person behind the curtain, or the thing hanging from the string, or whatever the case may be, and they flipped over the table and made a big deal out of it. And again, that was a good thing. It got rid of the really crazy frauds, the ones that were very obvious, unless you were somebody who was so desperate to believe that you didn't see the obvious. And the bad thing is it didn't take very long. Those people fled the field pretty quickly. And I'm not going to say they're all gone because, as we all know, there are people who are so desperate to believe that they're going to swallow just about anything you feed them if it makes them feel as though they're getting what they were hoping to get. But they're mostly gone. What remained, of course, were their tools. And by that I mean some of the things we use, pendulums and dowsing rods. There were devices that centered around automatic writing. There were things called thought boards that were kind of like Ouija boards today. The primary thing, though, was something called a planchette board, which is most definitely the precursor to the Ouija board that we see and that we talk about, that we use now. And the problem with those is that there was really no place for the physical debunkers to go. I mean, sure, there were ways to do that. There were trick boards. You can go online right now and get a trick board without any difficulty. There are things you can do with magnets to make it work. But really those things are pretty rare. And I mean, when Amanda uses her pendulum or when I use my dowsing rods, sure, there are people that can say that I'm manipulating them, but I don't recall anybody ever accusing me of having fishing line tied to them and making them point to where I want them to point to. So the physical debunkers were more or less out of business. They kind of went to work debunking purported haunted locations and things like that instead.
Right.
And that left the debunking to the scientists. And that's a good thing too, I guess. The problem there is that the scientists are always going to try to debunk everything that has no rational explanation. It's what they do. And in 1852, this guy named Carpenter wrote a scientific paper that basically explained away everything that we today think of as paranormal phenomena. He aimed it at what was then called spiritualism, but it was basically about the paranormal in general. And in that paper, he coined a term, and the word he made up was ideomotor. And it's a pretty good word, but fortunately over time, it's kind of evolved, and the word you hear now more is idiomatic, which I think is a much better word to describe with what they're getting at. And the best way to explain an idiomatic response, or I think what's kind of funny is they sometimes call it idiomatic phenomena, but the best way to explain an idiomatic response is when external input is given to a human and it leads to a reflexive response. And of course, the more I thought about that, the more I thought it doesn't really have to be a human. I think we're going to stick to humans tonight, but it can really be anybody, any being. When there's input and the response is reflective. When the doctor hits your knee with that rubber mallet and your leg kicks up, that is a reflexive response. Nothing you can do about it. It's just what happens. And there's somebody watching right now who's saying, yeah, that doesn't happen to me. My leg doesn't kick up. And to that person, of course, I would say, get help, dude, because that's the way your body's supposed to work. Something's wrong.
Jeez.
But, yeah, well, I mean, But it gets a little bit more complicated when you start talking about input that's not physical. Because an idiomatic response doesn't necessarily involve physical input. It involves input that can range from a visual image to an auditory issue, or even an olfactory thing, something you smell that causes a reflexive reaction that you can't help. And everybody's got them, right?
Yes.
Yes.
If you sit me on a couch and you make me watch American History X, when the curb stomping scene comes, I'm going to cover my eyes, or I'm going to turn away, or I'm going to do the 21st century version of that, which is to grab the remote. It's just what I do because I can't watch it. And that may not be a great example, but I think it makes the point. And we all have them. There's all something that you see or hear or smell that causes you to do something that you couldn't help it even if you wanted to. Now how does that all relate to the Ouija board? I haven't the slightest idea. And I mean, I read Carpenter's paper, and I read 3 very detailed scientific discussions of Carpenter's paper, and none of them explained to me what the hell that had to do with a Ouija board and why it does what it does. So that led me to the next scientific response, which is the age-old scientific trope, the ancient scientific metaphor for, I don't know, which is subconscious or unconscious thought. Whenever a scientist can't explain what they're seeing, they say it's got something to do with subconscious or unconscious thought, right? And I guess I can, that makes more sense to me. Certainly with a pendulum it makes sense because I can appreciate that if you're holding a pendulum, if you want it to say something badly enough, you're going to make it happen. And I can see that. I don't use a pendulum very often myself because I don't think I'm really steady enough to do it. But people do it, and I can certainly appreciate an unconscious thought making those things happen.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
right?
I agree. Yeah.
To a lesser degree, the dowsing rods. I only say to a lesser degree because the dowsing rods I think are a little more difficult to manipulate than a pendulum is, because they're inside that copper sleeve, so it's not like you're touching the things, and it's a little bit more difficult to manipulate them. But nevertheless, I can kind of see that as being a potential cause for those things happening, right? The Ouija board is a whole different deal. Because now what you're talking about is 2 or 3 people touching a planchette. Mm-hmm. And I guess my question with respect to unconscious or subconscious input making the planchette move is, are we talking 2 or 3 people that are having the same subconscious thought at the same time?
Right.
And all wanting the planchette to do the same thing? Because that's what's happening, right? Or are we talking about one person who's subconsciously taking over the other person or the other 2 people? So even at that, I'm not really sure how it is that works. Again, I get it. I understand the concept, and conceptually, I suppose it makes sense, but I don't see it as being viable. And I purposely left out a personal experience we had with a Ouija board specifically for that reason. Because we've had an experience with a Ouija board that personally I think harpoons the idea of, certainly the idea of idiomatic responses, and I believe kind of drives a stake through the notion of subconscious or unconscious thought as well. If you're watching this show, then you've got an interest in the bizarre. You've got an interest in the bizarre, and you probably saw a movie called The Conjuring. There's been a couple of sequels now, and our little gang has been fortunate enough to spend a couple of nights at the farmhouse on Round Top Road in Burrillville, Rhode Island, which is the house in which that original movie actually took place, where the Perrin family lived, and where all those events theoretically took place, right? And I mean, Andrea Perrin, I'm going to say, is a friend of mine. She's been on the ship many times. She's a very, very nice woman who swears up and down that all of the things in that movie were actual events. And as I said, I wasn't there, but she's a wonderful woman, and I see no reason to doubt anything that she says to me. In any event, one of the nights that we were down there, we did a Ouija board session. Sadly, the video from that session has no audio. So unfortunately, the video really wasn't usable because what I want to describe was more of an auditory thing. But what I do have, surprise, surprise, are a couple of photographs from that session.
Oh no!
And you may recognize the people in the photographs. Can you show still number one? There we have these two ladies on my right and left.
Having a grand old
Who
time.
are having a grand time for the moment, getting ready to do their Ouija board session at the Conjuring House. And then things took a serious turn, didn't they? Can you show the other still? Oh, deep in thought now.
Oh man, we're in it now.
Yeah, deep in thought at this stage of the game. Okay, so anyway, we did this Ouija board session, and it was, there were parts of it that were the way these things go. There was nothing really unusual, but then at some point, and I was taking notes. They were doing the Ouija board, and they would call out where the planchette stopped, and I was making notes. And frankly, what I was writing down was gibberish, right? I mean, I don't think, Eva and Amanda were doing the board, and I don't think either one of them thought they were giving me anything meaningful at all. And the letters I was writing down spelled nonsense words. There were a lot of Z's. A lot of nonsense as far as I was concerned, until we looked up the words later.
Yeah, so I got the idea at some point to be like, these words have to mean something, because
they spell, it wasn't just a bunch of letters.
It was full-on sentences.
Yeah, we felt like we were really talking to something, and it was spelling words, and I was like, what if we just don't understand the words? So forgive us, I don't actually have any of the words right now because they were so different that I don't even remember them right now. But it's, the sequences turned out to be words that were based in old alien language that some people believe is real. So it turned out to be a real language that we didn't know of when we were doing the Ouija board. So therefore, we couldn't have made that happen on the board subliminally because we didn't know the words. So we thought that was really cool.
Well, one of the words was the name of a voodoo priestess who was Jamaican and who had come to Rhode Island as a slave and had been there for quite some time. And I guess Amanda's right. The kind of the moral of the story is, while I completely understand ideomotor responses and I completely understand and understand how the conscious thoughts could be a viable reason for things happening, I'd like somebody to explain to me how we could subconsciously have used words that we didn't even know were really words. You know what I mean? That session baffled me.
It baffles me too because it was a full-on conversation and we were communicating with a voodoo priestess who didn't you decide she's still alive?
She is not still alive, but her theories are still followed by lots of people.
Which is insane to me because nobody in the room knew that was going on.
Right.
Certainly not I.
It was very, very cool in that way.
Yeah, the other thing that was interesting about that session, if I remember correctly, was asking where it came from, right? Mm-hmm. Asking where it came from, and it kept going to the moon.
Kept going to the sun.
Kept going to the moon and the sun in the corners.
Yeah, so we kept asking it where it was from, and it kept moving to the sun. So obviously, what does that mean? And it did it multiple times, which was scary, really, in my opinion.
Yeah, and we may at some point do an episode on the Conjuring House because we've had a couple of visits there. I think we have another one coming before too long, and there are so many theories about what the heck is going on down there that we may want to talk about it. And one of them, it was kind of interesting that it kept going to the sun, because there are a lot of people who think there's some alien stuff going on going on down there as well. Well, I mean, you know,
I could see it, honestly.
you know,
I
you know,
can.
the owners, Corey and Jen Heinzen, are really nice people, and Corey talks about gray aliens that people have seen down there. So that's a possibility, and that's what I thought was pretty interesting about the planchette constantly going up to the sun.
Yes, aliens.
Yeah. Amanda loves aliens. So anyway, so that's really all we had in terms of experiences and things of that nature. But we're going to wrap up. Why don't we, you know, Cookie? What do we have to say here in closing?
Well, I think it's important to mention that the Ouija board is not a game. So if you are going to use it as a tool for paranormal investigation or communicating with spirits. But always make sure to close it out, and always make sure to take it seriously, because it is not a game. I'd like to throw that out there, but all in all, I think that, you know, if it's used correctly, it can be used for positive experiences, and you know, you just gotta really learn about it before you do.
Good. Siva?
One other thing I would add for closing. So when we explain closing, I would suggest that you make sure you say goodbye at the end of a session. Make sure the planchet's moving to goodbye. And if it refuses to, you have to force it to say goodbye, and then cover it back in the box. Don't leave it exposed. And just be careful. Have fun, but be careful.
Just like everything else, I guess. And you know, the other thing is, I'm only thinking of this because of our discussion about our board today. You don't have to be literal. That is to say, you don't have to technically say goodbye, right? I mean, our Ouija board that we're going to have on the ship isn't going to say goodbye. It's going to say fair winds and following seas, which is, yeah, well,
so beautiful.
You know, as a Navy guy, you know, this is what I've always said to, you know, when a shipmate passes, or when somebody important to me goes, fair winds and following seas is what you hope for them, you know, as they move along. So that's what our board's going to say. So I guess what I'm saying is, while it's important to close it out, don't worry so much about being literal. Just do whatever it is you feel as though you need to do to make sure the session has been brought to an end, and the cut is clean, and nothing lingers that's going to follow you wherever you go, I guess. Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's going to do it as far as Ouija boards. Just a couple of quick things. On the next episode of Greater Boston Paranormal TV, we're going to have a good friend of ours who was on the ship this past weekend by the name of Mike Stevens, who runs an unbelievable outfit known as Granite Sky Services. And I'm not going to spoil the surprise. About what Granite Sky Services does, but I'll tell you this. I always say that Mike represents the best of us. And by us, I mean those of us who venture into the odd. in that when you see what Granite Sky does, those of you who are uninitiated are going to say nutcakes. And when you see Mike for the first time, you may look at Mike and say nutcake. And then you're going to hear him talk, and you're going to realize that he's not. And you're going to realize that he's a serious dude who is involved with some serious stuff. And he is, when we started our podcast, Mike was the guy I had in mind in terms of guests. And I just couldn't be happier that after talking to him this weekend on the ship, he was just all excited about coming down and doing an episode with us. He's a good friend of ours, and it is going to be great. You're going to love it. And while you're watching that, we are probably going to be in either Iowa or Kansas.
Very exciting. So
investigating the Villisca axe murder house in Villisca, Iowa, on Friday night, June 17th, and the infamous Sally House in Atchison, Kansas, on Sunday the 19th. The Sally House has been a bucket list item for me since the day I heard about it, and we are just over the moon about making this trip, and I anticipate at least 2 solid episodes. And I promise you that while we've started off slow here and in terms of breaking you into what we do and the things we use, these episodes, if they go the way I anticipate, they are going to knock you off your chair. So we're looking
Literally.
forward to it as much as you should be. Okay? So that's all we got. Thank you, Eva. Thank you, Cookie, as always. Thank you, crew.
John.
Thanks for having us.
And thank you for watching Greater Boston Paranormal TV. Good night.